So our panel today is how food companies are rethinking meat for the flexitarian consumer. I'm a surprise addition to the panel today. I'm serving both as a panelist and a moderator, so bear with me. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. So we have Dr. Nigel Hughes, who has been the Senior Vice President of Global Research, Quality, Nutrition, and Technology at Kellogg Company since 2017. Prior to joining Kellogg, Dr. Hughes was Chief R&D Officer for SC Johnson & Sons since 2014. And prior to that, he spent 10 years with Danone. Prior to that, he was with Unilever as a research scientist at its facility near Liverpool in 1989. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemistry from the University of Durham in the UK and a PhD from the University of Oxford. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you, Alison.
And then we have Sergio Eleuterio, who is the General Manager of Springboard Brands at the Kraft Heinz Company. Springboard is a high-octane team with the mission to build the next generation of power brands for Kraft Heinz. He has 15 years of marketing experience with positions in management, marketing, R&D, and retail marketing at Unilever, Grupo Boticario, and Kraft Heinz. Welcome, Sergio. And I am Alison Rabschnuk, Director of Corporate Engagement for the Good Food Institute. So today, what we're hoping to talk about is how to appeal to mainstream consumers by innovating and to give them a sensory experience that is similar to meat. So I'd like to first start by giving each of you a 3 to 5 minute overview on what your companies are doing in the plant-based protein space to appeal to mainstream customers and what you see as the opportunities for your brands and for the plant-based sector as a whole.
Good. Okay, so from a Kellogg point of view, I joined Kellogg a year and a half ago, and one of the first things I did was pull out a couple of books about the history of the company, and in many ways, Kellogg's one of the first plant-based nutrition companies. It goes right back to JH and WK 100 some years ago. And I'm not going to give a history lesson about Kellogg, but I think it's a really important foundation because if you go back then, of course, there were many of you in the audience will probably know parts of the Kellogg story, but there was the whole piece around the importance of plant-based nutrition, the setting up of the sanitarium in order to drive health and well-being, and the value of a plant-based diet versus a meat-based diet. Obviously, the company then built off of that into big cereal businesses and the like. And so fast forwarding, you come to 20 some years ago now when we actually acquired the Morningstar Farms business. So really fast forwarding into the heart of plant-based protein and the heart of bringing the benefits of plant-based protein to the mass consumer base, and so for the last since 1999, that's really been central to us, and we built a big business around that, the biggest business in North America around plant-based protein in that form, the form of burgers and meat substitutes and the like. Also for us, I think it is interesting that it's not just that, though. If we look at protein more broadly, we also see protein, the consumer demand and the consumer interest in protein going way more broadly than that. So now if we look at our, and that's not the central to the subject today, but if we then look at our wholesome snacks business, we've got a lot of interest in protein, plant-based protein in our wholesome snacks. So you see this is not only something which is narrowly defined from a consumer point of view in terms of meat replacement, but is actually way more broadly defined. We see that in North America. We actually see that increasing massively across the rest of the world too. So it's a bit of context.
Great, thank you.
Here. There you go.
Hello. So first, thanks for having me. I always love to talk about plant-based, and I think within the Springboard structure that most of you might be aware of already, that we announced March this year, one of the biggest platforms and one of the biggest things that we are investing on as defining the future of food is what we call natural and organic. So within that, several different areas of interest. provenance of ingredients, farm to table, the integrity of those ingredients, and the whole world of plant-based protein, right? So that's where Boca lives in, similar to Kellogg. Boca was one of the first plant-based proteins or protein alternatives in the market. It started in diners, and how you really got into retails in the 90s, and then joined Kraft family in the year 2000, and then Kraft Heinz today. But the reality is, with all this story, the market is pretty small today, still, right? We've seen a lot of development happening, and it's super exciting to see. But we feel that that market is about to tip now. Several different things happening that will guide that. So first, accessibility. That's something that is very important to us, to make sure that whatever technology comes out there, whatever solution comes out there, it is something that consumers can assess for price, for taste profile, for the easiness to understand in terms of message, right? I think that one of the reasons that that market has not developed too much yet is it feels complicated and clinical. And that's one of the things that we believe will change it. You just saw Boca new packaging coming through, much simpler, much bolder, connecting back to the story of the brand, connecting back to the 90s and to the origin of the brand. That plays a big role in simplifying the market and making the propositions easier to understand to consumers. So I'm super excited with what's about to come. Happy to talk to that today and our beliefs in terms of Boca. We are very interested into that market. We have a powerful brand with a lot of voltage that we haven't been paying too much attention before. And with Springboard and this new structure that I'm heading in Kraft Heinz, we already have dedicated teams, research and development, and investment behind that structure. So our expectation is to play a big role into what's about to become the plant alternative, the plant-based alternatives in the U.S. today.
Great, thank you. And I'll just give a quick overview of the work that we're doing at GFI on behalf of the Flexitarian consumer. So really, in corporate engagement, our department is at the intersection of supply and demand. So on the supply side, we work really closely with all of the plant-based manufacturers, and we're really happy to have many of them here at the conference. We also work with a lot of the big food companies. And really our focus is on the Flexitarian consumer. As research shows, the numbers vary a little bit here and there, but it looks like about a third of consumers do represent themselves as flexitarian versus a much smaller percentage that identify as vegan and vegetarian. So we really do see that is where the opportunity is, and that informs a lot of the work that we're doing. So one example of that on the demand side is we're working with a lot of the restaurant chains in the U.S. So we created the first annual Good Food Scorecard, where you can find it at goodfoodscorecard.org. And it's an evaluation of the menus of the top 100 restaurants and looking at whether these restaurants are offering anything to appeal to somebody who is looking for a plant-based entree. So we gave them points based on whether they had a single item, whether they are using words like protein to describe the meal. We see that as a very important way to get more people to eat plant-based foods because there is a misperception that a lot of plant-based foods don't contain protein, and we know people are looking for protein more than ever. So there's also a lot of research showing that describing foods as meatless, meat-free, vegan, or vegetarian can really turn off a lot of the flexitarian consumers. So we encourage them not to put them in a separate section of the menu and not to label them in a way that might dissuade a mainstream consumer from ordering them. And then on the grocery side, we're going to be working with a lot of retailers to really start thinking about how do we merchandise these products in a way that mainstream consumers will find them. So in our view, in our dream is actually this thing called the protein counter of the future. And this is where a mother or father can go in to buy dinner for their kids to feed their family, and they go to a protein counter where they have a choice of plant-based protein, animal protein, and eventually cell-based protein. So that for us is a way to really make sure that all of these products are accessible to everyone out there. All right, moving on. What is your insight on whether consumers really want plant-based meat that mimics real animal meat?
I think my mic's working, but I'll pass that one to Sergio, because I'm going to be the passing guy here. I can see that's part of my role. To me, we should. That's a slight oversimplification of the question. I am absolutely sure we've got consumers of every type who want every type of experience. One of the things that we talk about a lot in Kellogg, and it's really important to us, is we live in a culinary world. The world has changed. Yeah? Just think about, actually, if you go north of here and you look at the world of wine. If you go back 20, 30 years, the world of wine was very, very simple. People liked red wine or white wine. They liked it sweet or they liked it dry. That was it. That whole industry, that whole world has completely changed over the last 30 to 40 years. Why? Because people have got used to the lexicon around wine, and therefore value has been created in that business. If you look at coffee, you go over to the guys in Seattle, Starbucks, completely transformed the world of coffee. We never knew that we needed a latte dee-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. Now we do. Now everybody needs that, yeah? The world of chocolate is exactly the same. For me, if you look at food, if you look at the mega trends within food, the whole move towards the importance of culinary is absolutely critical. Why do I belabor that? Because that then tells me that people will want to see that culinary come through in whatever type of food they're looking at. Some people will say, absolutely, mimicking my burger that I've eaten for the last 20 years is critically important to me. On the other hand, other people will say, no, simple ingredients are the most important. The textures of nuts or seeds are really, really important to me, and therefore that's what they'll be looking for. The important thing, and Sergio alluded to it before, companies like ours can offer access, is offering access to that wide range of foods for people who want the wide range of different offerings.
Yeah, not to be to repeat, completely agree with Nigel there, and I think there is looking into. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the jobs theory, right? Or that's how we do our innovation. So really to identify pain points in the consumer lives, and then understanding and trying to answer to those pain points. From there, you can really delight and create desire in a broader sense, right? So that's how we think innovation in our brands and how we build that. So into that sense, if you think of the Flexitarians and where most of the growth in the market is happening now, and the behavior of the market 20 years ago and the consumers that were in this market 20 years ago is very different, right? So 20 years ago, we were looking at low-fat, Weight Watching, and a lot of that world, and that's where plant-based protein was appealing to, and it was very successful in solving for that issue, for that pain point. Flexitarians, though, they're different, much more culinary focused. They cook a lot from scratch, semi-scratch and full from scratch cooking. It's about the recipes, about the discovery. It's about using and giving their own personal touch. So into that sense, for some people, finding a meat alternative that mimics exactly the taste, and it is a pain point for some people. But most of the market that we believe in is really developing into that ingredient and cooking and building flavors and combining their own personality and their own creativity into the plant-based world. We believe that offering options that would allow them to, from the ingredient perspective, all the way into more complex and more exciting solutions, that will solve for the pain points on the Flexitarian side. So it's really about more than the market developing, is the people that are consuming are different. They have different needs. And then we have to be very mindful for that. Solutions that used to work 20, 10 years ago will not work for those people today. So to Nigel's point, I think there are many different consumers out there. Have to choose one and really please them with your solutions. As Boca, where we're looking at is really at the Flexitarian. That person that is balancing their diets and using their creativity to build their own meals. And my personal opinion is that is where the market is growing, really.
Great. Cool. Great. Yeah. So from GFI's perspective, we think flavor is really key here. So many of you may have known that we released last year Nielsen research for the first time, which analyzed the plant-based sector. So we have defined it as products that are alternatives to traditional meat, dairy, and egg products. So we're about to release the second round of the data. So it's basically August of 2018 versus a year ago. And really what we have found, and you'll all see this in the coming weeks, is that the fastest growing brands are those that are focusing on flavor. So Data Essential, which is a research company in the food service sector, also released some research in this over the past year, and they asked their 1,500 consumers how important are the following attributes in plant-based alternatives, and they had a list: flavor, price, texture, nutrition, and flavor overwhelmingly was the number one factor that's most important when they choose plant-based products. So although health is typically the number one reason consumers say that they're eating more plant-based foods or intend to eat more plant-based foods, consumers still want to eat foods that taste great. So I think the focus on flavor is really key. So let's move now to talk about how we brand for a flexitarian consumer. So what are the challenges and opportunities? So is it important for manufacturers like Kraft, Heinz, and Kellogg's to label their products differently to appeal to flexitarians? So what do you do with the whole vegan or vegetarian label on your foods?
I'll let you have first shot, Sergio. Yeah, no, I don't mind.
We have a saying at Kraft that the packaging, more than the label, right? Packaging is your hardest working media impression. That's where your brand, that's where the value of a brand is really, like you can buy millions of dollars in ads, but if your message, if your purpose, if your proposition is not clear on your packaging, in your design, you're not really making a good job there. So principles of design, I think design needs to be simple. It needs to be easy to understand. It needs to contain in that millisecond that your system one is connecting to that part of the shelf, it needs to tell who you are. Boca was not doing a good job there. We had the same packaging for 15 years. It's crazy, right? It's like with all the changes. So we went really down into understanding what is the essence of that brand and what's the purpose, what we want to communicate. And is that simple, approachable, creative way of dealing with your own food, right? That's what Boca should stand for. And that's why we worked with our agency partners to create the new Boca design that you guys have seen in the market. It's super simple, right? So more than for that brand purpose, you need to convey that. So you see this very bright red color, which is very original to Boca. Have the logo redesigned as well to convey the story back into the 90s, into the 70s when we were back in Boca Raton, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is consumers don't check for checklists. Marketeers do, right? They don't care about it. So you will see our pack is very clear on protein. That's one of the things that consumers are looking at the most. Very clear on taste. You have a big image of a great burger there showing what you can do with it, and that's it. You don't have all the check boxes, and the cleaner you get, the simplest, the last impactful messages will come, right? So we had, for example, we're just discussing this in the backstage, right? We had our turkey burger for ages. And with the new pack design, now consumers actually can see that it's vegan. It was already vegan. It was already there. No one saw it because it was so packed in a lot of checklists and a lot of things that we wanted to have in the pack. So I think that said, hardest work in impression, how you can make your packaging really work well for you is to be simple, to talk to your brand, to make that your most important points there. And avoid trying to to do all that complex packaging like claim support for everything there. Consumers don't really care too much about that in the moment that they're buying it.
Again, I completely agree with all that when it comes to the packaging and how we express to the consumer. There's a clear move from a consumer point of view to looking for the world to be simplified. That's a change that I've seen. I've been in and around this industry for the last 30 years. That's a clear change that I've seen. I would just answer the question in a slightly different way as well, Alison, which is one of the most interesting things today is where we first come into contact with new ideas and new thinking. And if you think about food adoption, then that's really something that has transformed over the last 20 years. If you go back 20 to 30 years, food adoption was mainly, you came across new foods mainly by having a new brand being launched, seeing it on a TV, your mother going and buying some, you trying it, if the family liked it, you bought more of it, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the way that we access new food today. It's just not the way we do it. We eat out of home, quite clearly we eat out of home so much more. If you think about new food adoption, the last new food that you tried, you probably tried it at a food, maybe at a food truck, much more likely than you did going into a supermarket and saying, I'm going to try that for the first time. And there are a myriad of ways and places that we're now accessing new food. Why do I raise that when you ask a question about what we communicate? Because what you communicate it's extraordinarily important. What is the context in which you're receiving your messages? So I couldn't agree more with Sergio. When we're talking about in a supermarket or a grocery store, then simplicity and straightforwardness is absolutely critical. I think it's really interesting to think about what are critical elements when we talk about accessing food in other places. And I think there's some really exciting things being done by a number of people who are in the room here in terms of the way of bringing their brands to life in totally different environments to the way a traditional consumer packaged goods company, although I do hate that phrase, but anyway, a traditional consumer packaged goods company would go about launching a food or launching an idea. Obviously, we've got all the spaces where we access food through restaurants, through what in the industry we would call food service, but that's the sort of cafes that we're going to come across. We come across on a daily basis. We've got food trucks. We access a lot of food. We come across a lot of new food through institutions where we don't have that much choice. And you raised a point backstage earlier about the military. You raised, obviously there are schools and things like this. These are all have to be in the consideration set. These really do. And so I think it's so important that we think through what those things mean for us. And they will mean different things for different brands. They will mean different things for different brands. One of the most important things when you ask about what should our communication be is that it is congruent with whatever the brand is that we're proposing and offering. And some brands may be all about being very high-end, being very exclusive, and that's kind of cool, and it's great because we see those brands as being extraordinarily successful. Other brands may be more like the brands that we interact with, which are much more about accessibility and democratization, and you need then to communicate and to cast a character and an experience which is congruent with that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think some of the research I've seen shows that most people who are eating plant-based meals are eating them at home. And I think it's because there is still a dearth of these products in the food service world. So we encourage all manufacturers to work more to try to get their products into food service, because that is a great way for product trial, absolutely. And just to build on some of the points you both made, we do believe that protein is a real key element for highlighting these products. So most of the plant products, do have a good amount of protein, some more than others, but we do think we know consumers are actively searching for more protein. We believe at GFI also to play down the word vegan. It does have a lot of baggage. There was an interesting study by a company called Morning Consult that was released back in May, and they asked 2,100 respondents what words consumers like and don't like on food labels. So they had 21 different descriptors, and vegan was the least liked word. Fresh, farm fresh, sourced from American farmers were the top 3. We also believe it's important to position plant-based products, as indulgent and not restrictive. So really play up the plant power, the plant protein, the great tastingness of these products rather than what they are missing. So what do you see as the biggest white space opportunities in the sector? Is it with ingredients? Is it with types of products? Is it with areas in the grocery store? Is it with technology? What do you see as some of these opportunities?
I would focus on two areas. One is definitely around the grocery store and the point of purchase. There's not a lot of coherency when it comes to the range of foods that we're talking about here. If I think about the Morningstar Farm brand and the Kellogg world, it's categorized under frozen food, and that can be alongside certain other foods of a similar type. It can be miles away from other foods with plant-based protein. So I think that's a really big way of unlocking this opportunity more and looking through a slightly different lens. The other one, and this is one that we're pursuing very heavily within Kellogg as a way to relook at white space, is looking through the occasion lens. Yeah, a lot of consumer goods companies for a long time have looked purely through a consumer lens rather than looking through an occasion lens, and in the end, we eat at different occasions and in different ways at different occasions. And I think that's very, very important, and particularly this business, because it has tended to get locked into particular, very specific food types rather than looking at the occasion. I can tell you the biggest protein need in my household, I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old son, is immediately they get back from school, when if they don't have something to eat, they will eat parts of the furniture. Yeah? You know this, anyone who's had a 13 and a 15-year-old son. That's a massive occasion. How do we think about that occasion? Do we really put that focus on the way in which we communicate with our consumers and the way in which we develop our foods?
So you see snacking as a white space opportunity?
Yes, because snacking is ubiquitous now. It's not something specific.
Yeah, I think building to that point, I think a lot of, on the technology front, a lot has been done on texture. So texturized plant protein. It is much bigger now. So there's so much more possibilities in terms of technology development. I think the next frontier there is really about how you can get to taste. I think there's a revolution coming, right? So we call it flavor from within. So instead of adding a lot of things to something that doesn't taste anything, like soy protein or any other sort of form of extruded material, it could really get more than that, right? That's how food is. Food is, and taste is layers, is different textures and different impacts, right? We prefer food that is richer in that sense. So I think the market today has not yet gotten to that point of multi-texture, multi-flavor, with more technology being involved into that production part. So I think technology-wise, lot to do on the flavor side, a lot to do on that world. I think there is on the consumer adoption, totally agree with occasions. People think about occasions, right? When you shop, you're shopping for dinner, you're shopping for lunch, you're not shopping for having Morningstar or Boca. You're shopping for what you're going to eat, how you're going to feed your family. Totally agree there. And we're not making it easier for consumers to shop that way. And I think that's a big thing as well. And that when we say that the market is about to tip is because those things we're already seeing that. When you combine the plant-based alternative next into the meats that the flexitarians are also buying, it makes it much easier and much simpler for them to shop. And that's something that we start hearing from retailers, and it's a message that we continue to put forward. And there are cases already, like the non-dairy milk categories is basically that, right? So we're getting to that point. So to me, it's hard to say there's one thing. I think there's retail, there's occasions, there's more development into the technology, but really how you get better flavors and better food experiences and how you make it easier to shop are the two things that I think will actually get the category to tip.
Great. So our innovation group at GFI has identified several commercialization opportunities. They actually published a document that is available on our website, so I encourage anyone who's interested to check it out. And some of it is informed by our analysis of the Nielsen research, but some of the ideas that we've come up with is the refrigerated section for plant-based meats we think poses a big opportunity. So whether it's some of the brands already making frozen products, are they potentially able to be refrigerated at some point, or is there the possibility of creating new products for that section? We also know that the shelf-stable area of plant-based meats is wide open. Good Catch, which is actually one of our sponsors here today, is going to be coming out with a plant-based tuna product, but there's probably a lot more opportunity there for expansion. And then another is the prepared food section. So it's a $12 billion business in the grocery world, and only 2.2 million of that is actually coming from plant-based meat at this time. So if you're familiar with the UK grocer Tesco, they worked with Wicked Kitchen, which is Chad and Derek Sarno's business, to create a collection of 20 products that are all plant-based. It's pizza and salads and sandwiches and wraps. And they sold 4 million of these in 33 weeks. So they are flying off the shelves, hugely popular. We see a huge opportunity for the grab-and-go section of the grocery store as well. So we have only a couple more minutes left. Are there any specific strategic decisions your companies have made that you would like to share for the future?
I think in terms of strategic decisions, in terms of Kraft Heinz, right, how we see the market, considering that as one of the biggest pillars that we have in creating Springboard is, I think, to me, a clear statement of what we believe in and what we want to go after, right? Taking that team that I'm very proudly leading in the last year or so that we've been working on this, and completely changing brands like Boca that have a lot of heritage and voltage to be what it can be, to really develop the market and support consumers that already have so much love for the brand, and taking that further to more people. I think that is maybe the most strategic decision that we as a company are doing, right? We have more than 200 categories that we operate in. It's a big company. Brands that are the size of Boca usually don't get a lot of attention. So when you get a specific team looking into that, it really can produce disproportionate results, and that's what we're aiming for. So plant-based alternative as a broader concept is something that we believe is happening. It will happen much in every sense or form. I love the idea of the discussion on different temp states, right? Consumers are not limited to that. it will expand. So I think we are gearing up to be part of that expansion, closing the gap of a brand that we already have, but also looking into any other further opportunities into that sector.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Sergio just said. I began by telling the story, the history of Kellogg, and so this kind of space is thoroughly embedded within the company, and we just see this opportunity opening up more and more for us, and therefore it becomes a high strategic priority both internally, but also in the way in which we interact with the external world. I'm not going to talk about specifics in terms of investments or acquisitions. I'm not in a place to do that, and it would be inappropriate to do that. But it is extraordinarily interesting for us to look at those spaces externally as well. In the end, from our point of view, it's very, very clear. This is a paradigm shift that's happening. This is not just a trend. This is a paradigm shift that's happening, and it will unfold over the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years. Therefore, it's critical that, number one, we're in it from the beginning, and we believe we are. And number two, that we're mutually supportive in this space. We see this very much as, an incoming tide rises all boats. This is not about slicing out small elements of this business. It's a change. The world is going to fundamentally change, and it is changing right now. How that turns out, how that turns out, I'm not a futurist. I can't predict futures, but I know there is a future where plant-based protein and plant-based sustenance more broadly will play a much, much larger role than it plays today. And so, for us, there's everything to play for, but it's central to our strategy. Yesterday, I was over in Boston talking to lots of hedge funds and investors, and if you want to go online and look at the script there, I can tell you it was exactly what I'm saying right now. So that's how confident we are that we're happy to stand in front of a bunch of pretty aggressive investors sometimes and really say this is central to what we believe in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your insights today, Sergio and Nigel. And we're really excited at GFI to work with companies like yours, and excited to work with all plant-based manufacturers and retailers and grocery stores. So please do reach out to our corporate engagement department if we can be of assistance in any way to any of you. So that's it. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.